is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Bowie sat out 2 straight years at Kentucky. Like, he didn't play for 2 straight years to get his legs right, and then he had his senior year. And then that's when Portland took him. So if there is any criticism that I have of Portland with that pick, it's definitely you took a guy that's been injured 2 years straight. Like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take that chance. And as I said, if you're in the top 10, I don't care if you have 3 shooting guards that are great. You take Michael Jordan. He's the best player available.
NBA draft historian and analyst Matthew Maurer is the creator of the online basketball draft history database, thedraftreview.com. Its purpose is to curate, preserve, and memorialize the history of the NBA draft, its teams, players, and the stories surrounding the draft's historical events. The site was created out of a need to ensure the rich but neglected history of the NBA draft is thoroughly and accurately recorded. In his dual role as a draft analyst, Maurer specializes in the evaluation of NBA pro prospects, critically assessing and providing recommendation on the draft stock of a wide range of players each season. Maurer was formerly the senior scout for NBADraft.net and at present continues to provide insightful draft takes featured in publications including CBS Sports, Eurobasket, Vice Sports, NBA.com, and ESPN. He is frequently featured on sports radio throughout the country and serves on the executive board of the Association for Professional Basketball Research. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you're subscribed to the Hoopheads podcast so you don't miss an episode, and tell a friend or colleague in the basketball community to give us a listen. The Hoopheads pod is available on all the major podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube. Get ready to take an entertaining dive into the NBA draft, past and present, with Matthew Maurer from thedraftreview.com. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome to the podcast from the Draft Review, Matthew Maurer. Matthew, welcome.
Hey guys, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are beyond excited to have you on tonight to be able to talk NBA draft, be able to talk to you about how you went about becoming one of the foremost authorities on the history of the NBA draft, and just dive right into all of that information. Let's start out by talking to you a little bit about the process of how you went about getting involved and interested in the NBA draft. What was it that attracted you to the draft as something that you really wanted to study?
It wasn't anything you just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to become a draft historian. It started 1985. I'm 7 years old. And I see this weird spectacle that's because Patrick Ewing's coming out of Georgetown, and the NBA decides they didn't want to have the tanking that was going on with Ralph Sampson with Houston in '83. So David Stern says, hey, we'll do a lottery. And it was the first time I ever saw anything or heard anything about that, because in traditional draft formats, it's by team records. So he did the lottery, and ever since then, it's kind of been something that's been in the back of my mind. And then when I was about 11 years old, a friend of mine, we used to collect the basketball cards, and you'd look on the back and you'd see where they were drafted. And like all 90s kids, Michael Jordan was my guy. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, how was Jordan drafted third? Who was above him? And, I'm like, I got to know who was because Michael Jordan's the best basketball player in the history of the game, just about, and I know people have their differences with that, but he was taken third. Like, why? And who was in front of him? And then you find out, okay, Sam Bowie was drafted second, and Akeem Olajuwon went first, and you're like, what? That's crazy. And then it started to become more and more of a TV spectacle for me. I would sit down, watch it, and just became enamored with how human beings gauge other human beings, which is basically what the NBA draft is. I mean, sure. It's the most flawed process in the history. It's humans judging other humans, and people are just trying to get it right. So that's really how I became enamored with the process.
All right. So how do you take it from an interest, from something that you want to learn more about? How do you take that and create a business around that? When does that become an idea and a thought that, like, hey, I can really take something that I love to learn about and turn it into a website, a business? How did you go about doing that?
Sure. Well, like anybody who was growing up in the early 90s, there was only one guy you could really go to. This is before the internet. And God rest his soul, Don Leventhal was a guy who used to put together NBA draft reports, and you could send him a money order or a check, and he would send you back a little stapled guide with all the players' scouting reports and everything. So then I said, oh, this is interesting. And, me and Don were talking all the time. I end up befriending him. And then it becomes, well, I'm loving this scouting thing. So I start to scout just as good as I could for as limited as my knowledge was. And I went to the library and I checked out all these basketball books and coaching books and really sunk my way into the game. And then when Don passed, I then said, well, I need to continue to do this. So then I got with a buddy about 2002. He already had his website up, but I wanted to add the scouting aspect to it, and that was NBAdraft.net. So me and Aaron, we got together, and we did really well until I decided to step down from there. And then I decided, hey, I had a wife, and, real life sets in. You got to pay bills.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Life comes at you fast.
Oh, does it ever? You got bills, you got kids, and you're like, oh, I would love to sit in front of this, TV and scout, but, I got to get out into the real world and, get into my degree and do all this other things that, I put on the back end because, I'm too busy wrapped up in this game. So then I decided, hey, maybe I need to do some draft history stuff. So, and that's kind of how it went.
And when you were able to put that all together, when did you start to see that it would become viable, where it was something that you could put together? When did you start to get feedback from other people that said, hey, what you're doing, we're finding tremendous value in it? When did it start to become a reality that, hey, I can do this as a full-time thing?
Well, that's just it. It started to be, well, first of all, everybody told me I was crazy. I was like, everybody's like, dude, you're doing what? You're researching every player that's been drafted since 1950. They're like, there's no way you can do that. It's impossible.
Yeah, but weren't you finding people that were like, that is awesome? Weren't you finding as many people that were telling you it was awesome that you were doing that? I would just think that with the number of people that love the NBA and just kind of love the spectacle of the draft as you described it, I would think that not only were you getting the crazy feedback, but you were also getting, I would think, some positive feedback, or no?
No, I wasn't getting that at all. I was always getting the why are you doing this? Like, what? Why?
You should have called me up. I would have given you some positive feedback at that time.
There you go. I could have needed it, let me tell you. But I just kept pressing forward, and then slowly agents and even some teams said, hey, we're taking a look at what you got here, and we're weighing other players, and we're looking at the past and kind of how we evaluated certain situations. So it began to be kind of a tool that people use to kind of gauge the thought processes of the time. And then, like with Zion Williamson, that was a guy that people have asked me about ad nauseum. What do you think of him?
Why?
Have you seen anything?
Why would they ask you about him?
Why are people interested in Zion? I can't understand that. It makes no sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're asking me that more because they know, because I'm a historian, they're all basically like, look, do you have anybody in this database that even resembles anything close to him? And I'm like, no, he's a unicorn. I've never seen anything close to this. Probably Larry Johnson and Charles Barkley are probably even the closest. But, I mean, you're talking about 40 more pounds and maybe an inch less. So it's amazing. It really is with Zion.
Yeah, he is. I said this on the podcast a couple times over the last year or so. I first saw him play. Obviously, you saw his Twitter highlights when he was in high school, but didn't see him play any full games or have any idea whether or not he could play the game. You're just watching him dunk. And then I saw him play in that Canadian tour that Duke went on at the beginning of the season last year. And you just watch the guy play, and obviously his athleticism pops off the screen to no end. But then I don't think people realized some of the other skills that he had, those intangibles as a good teammate, and then his ability to pass and just handle the ball in a way that I don't think people thought that he could when he was coming out of high school. And I was thumping for him to be the number one pick since that first time I watched him play a full game when he played on that Canadian tour. And got some pushback from a couple people here and there that, said, I'm not sure, can he shoot it well enough? And I'm like, gosh, that athleticism and just the other things that he can do out there on the floor, I think in the NBA game where it's spread and, he can attack, and what guy do you put on? Who guards him? Who guards him? You put a big guy on him, he's going to go right by him. You put a smaller guy on him, he's just going to bully him to the basket. I just think that his ultimate ceiling is pretty high. Jason, while we were doing the last podcast, showed me he was 12 of 13 from the field tonight for
29 points.
29 points. So he's obviously off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, I mean, he's I don't have the words to even describe him, really, when you talk about the physical makeup and everything he did at Duke. And I mean, and to your point, I had the same feedback when I initially said that he was the number one pick. People were like, oh, no, RJ Barrett's way better than him. And I'm like, man, this kid is like a once-in-a-generation type athlete. I don't know if I have the number one pick if I could take RJ Barrett over him. And they were like, oh, you're crazy. And then the draft started getting close. Then by the time March hit, it was like, yeah, he's
Everybody's on the bandwagon by then. Everybody jumped on it pretty quick once you got a chance to watch him for any length of time. I'm so looking forward to just seeing what kind of crazy highlights are going to come out of his season this year. And obviously it's going to be a year where the Pelicans are going to be better than, some of the teams that, like the team that Anthony Davis went to or the team that LeBron went to. This Pelicans team, I think, is going to be probably, they're going to be competing at that back end of the Western Conference playoffs, which is better than what the average number one pick gets to go and play with. So he's got some veteran guys. He's got some good players around him. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he develops over the course of the year, just in terms of his role and how Alvin Gentry, uses all the pieces and parts that he has with the Pelicans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's I love Jay Morant though. That's my other guy. So it'd be interesting to see between him and RJ Barrett. It's going to be a very good Rookie of the Year race for sure.
All right, so tell me about Morant. I watched very little of Morant during the regular season until the tournament. And when I watched him in the tournament, the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that he was just such a tremendous passer. And to me, passing is the one skill that, I think translates to every level of basketball. So if you're a good passer in college, I think as long as you have the other surrounding skills, passing continues to translate into the NBA. And I also think it's something that when a guy is a truly gifted passer, I don't think it's something that you can teach. I think it's either something that you have or you don't have. And Morant, to me, when I watched him, I'm like, that guy knows how to pass the ball. He'd be a guy that if I was playing on his team, I would love to play with him because he just seemed to always make the right pass, the simple pass, get the ball to the guys in places where they wanted it. And then you combine that with the tremendous athleticism that he has. I think he's got a huge, huge upside. And clearly, to me, Zion and Morant were head and shoulders above everybody else. Barrett, I wasn't quite as high on, so I'm curious to get your take on what you think he's going to be in the league. But first, I guess, tell us why you like Morant so much, and then give us your take on Barrett.
I mean, a lot of what you said. I mean, athletically, he's basically the perfect point guard for this generation. I mean, we take a look at those that came before him, like Derrick Rose, John Wall, Westbrook. I mean, he matches that pedigree of athleticism. The part about passing, few people concentrate with him on because they're so fixated with his athleticism. But one of the things that I love about him is his court vision. And he's a rarity because most of the time when guys have that elite level of athleticism, they don't really look at the floor as well. They have like tunnel vision and they just go straight to the basket. He really sees the floor really well. I can't say enough about him. The one thing that I think I'm more worried about him is durability. But other than that, I don't see how they don't have a good point guard there for the next 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, no question about that. So what do you think about Barrett? I've been on record that there's something, and this is going to be a very inexact science here, but there was just something about him that felt off to me, and I don't know what that thing was. Maybe it was just basketball IQ and understanding certain situations and when to do what, and when to defer, and when to take control. But it just, anytime I watched him, he always left me wanting something else. I know that's not a very scientific scouting report, but he certainly has all the skills. He has the size. I just am not sure exactly what he's going to be. So I'm curious to get your take. What kind of a pro do you think he's going to be as he looks down in his career?
RJ was a guy that I was down on for most of the year, and I don't know if that was the way that Duke was. I felt kind of forcing him to take shots. I mean, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe he was forcing himself to take a lot of shots. It just felt like to me, to kind of piggyback off what you were saying when you saying just didn't look right. I just felt like he came into Duke, thought, hey, I'm the number one guy. And you could tell that clearly the fact that he wasn't getting what maybe Zion was getting, I think did dig on him a little bit. I mean, I know they're on the draft talking about that's my brother and I'm so happy for him. And I'm sure they are both very happy for each other, but
it had to be hard on him. It had to be hard on him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, RJ, he's Canadian. He's got Steve Nash cosign. That's my godparent. Everybody had him number one with a bullet before he went to Duke. And then you go to Duke and this guy, this juggernaut, this force of this freak of nature is your teammate. And there's just no way you can compete. I mean, even Zion's injury that he had last year with the sneaker blowing up was epic. Like, there's nothing about Zion last year that wasn't a story. So I just felt like RJ, I think it vexed him a little bit. I think he was definitely agitated about it. And I almost wonder if Cam Reddish, the other teammate, I think Cam Reddish is way better than what we saw at Duke. And I just feel like Duke, unfortunately, just didn't have the cohesion at the end of the day to get it done.
All right, so let's go to a comparison that Jason and I talked about when we did our NBA draft preview back before the draft. We talked about Reddish and DeAndre Hunter, and we both felt like Reddish had probably a higher upside if you could tap into it, just because better athlete, a more fluid offensive player. And DeAndre Hunter, I was kind of on record as, because obviously we're Cavs fans here in Cleveland, so we had, we were there, sitting to see who we were going to take, at that spot, and we weren't sure who we were going to get. And I was hoping that it wasn't going to be Hunter, because to me, Hunter topped out as a guy who's going to be a solid pro. There's no question he's going to be a 10-year NBA player, but I feel like was very mechanical and just was never going to be the type of dynamic offensive player that I'd have wanted to take in the top 5. So maybe compare DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish and kind of where you see their two ceilings or potential based on what you've seen from them.
Well, without a doubt, I mean, Hunter's calling card is defense. He really did a good job for most of the NCAA tournament until he ran into the buzzsaw that was Carson Edwards. But I mean, he locked up guys. He was very good all year long. And I was kind of got some flack from people because I didn't view him as a top 5 guy. People said, "Oh, you got him too low in your mock," and I'm like, I just don't see top 5 talent. I agree. He'll definitely be a starter, and he'll definitely be a guy that's a glue guy for an NBA team. You want
more from your 5th pick, and that's exactly what I said. I want the ceiling of my 5th pick to be higher than an average NBA starter.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and case in point, Calbert Cheaney was a great guard in the NBA. He got drafted 7th. If he gets drafted 15th, no one thinks that's a bad pick. But he got drafted 7th, and he had just an okay career. That's kind of like where you're at with Hunter. It's like, yeah, I see everything that everybody's saying, but I don't see the value of being a top 5 pick. Yeah, he can lock up guys. Yeah, he's a great standstill 3-point shooter. But creating off the dribble consistently, taking guys off the dribble, I just don't see that at the NBA level for him.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. And I think, again, he may fit very, very well with Atlanta just because of, again, the other guys that they have around him and what they need from him. And they're certainly building an interesting team there. But I would have wanted a higher upside player at that spot. And I think Reddish probably fits that bill. He's a guy who, his production, as you described, was down a little bit at Duke from what people expected when he came out of high school. But he certainly has the talent, the size, the skill level to be able to succeed. I think the question was about his work ethic and his drive. So how do you answer people with that question? What do you think of Reddish? What's he going to end up doing this year, you think? And then ultimately, where does his career end up?
Yeah, I have actually made a statement that I thought Cam Reddish might end up having a better NBA career than RJ Barrett. And of course, my Facebook page exploded with comments, and people were like, "How could you say that? That you're crazy." And to me, the reason why anybody who watched Duke, and anybody who doubts me, watch a Duke game when they were playing. Often, Cam Reddish would get the ball with 5 seconds left. So, what is he supposed to do? Of course, he's going to have to shoot, and he's going to have probably a bad shot. And that's often what happened. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, imagine you're the 3rd wheel at Duke. You have Zion Williamson, who's electric, catching the ball, dunking. You have RJ, who's slashing. And, I mean, RJ was a gunner. Let's just be honest. RJ, yep. He was a black hole at Duke. I don't care what anybody says. And then you're there, and you're like, okay, now I get to shoot. I mean, to me, it would have been very hard to establish a rhythm on that team as the 3rd wheel.
Yeah, I think
that's also the problem with Trey Jones. Trey Jones last year had the same problem, I think. So that's my answer to anybody who doubts Cam Reddish. It's like, did you watch Duke? Did you see how he was hard for him to get a rhythm?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how what he does translates to the NBA. And it'll be interesting, I think, to compare the career arc of Hunter and Reddish, because I think, they're obviously on the same team. They're tied sort of together because I think that they were people who were looking at that position. Those were two guys certainly that they would have been considering. And so it'll be very interesting to watch their careers develop over the next 10 years and see who ends up having a better career. And then the three Duke guys, looking at, I think Zion pretty much, as long as he doesn't get hurt, is going to be a no-brainer. But, you compare, as you said, Cam Reddish to RJ Barrett, who knows? Who knows what's going to end up happening? A lot of it also depends on the situation.
And I think that's the big thing to me is if I was picking between the two players, I think I would choose Cam Reddish's position and not choose RJ Barrett's, because I just think that the Knicks have potential to get better, but I think it's a lot longer of a process for them to be a potential contender, whereas I think the Hawks have laid a pretty good foundation.
Oh, yeah, way, way better. And Kevin Durant said it best in just the recent interview. No one cares about the Knicks anymore. I mean, that's, it's like, I understand for the 70s and the 80s and the 90s kids, the Knicks mattered. But in today's generation, I mean, what have the Knicks done in the last 10 years?
Kick Charles Oakley out of the arena.
Yeah, you haven't seen much that's made you interested in them, that's for sure.
No, and I mean, other than Porzingis, I mean, they haven't, and Carmelo, they really haven't had anything. So it's like, if I'm RJ Barrett, I'm like, man, I gotta be Carmelo Anthony, and then you see how they treated Carmelo Anthony at the end. I mean, it's just like
they had 2 weeks of Linsanity, though.
Oh, this is true. This is true.
You can always hang your hat on that, New York. All right, let's talk a little local flavor here for us. The Cavs draft. Talk about the three guys that we were able to pull in the first round, and give us your thoughts on Garland. I was on record at least of wanting Jarrett Culver in that spot just because I felt like he fit better next to Colin Sexton. I didn't necessarily want two 6'1", 6'2" guards that kind of have a score-first mentality. But give us your thoughts on what Garland was in college, which was a very a very short sample size. But what you think of Garland as a pro prospect?
I actually love Garland. I was one of the people that was really down on Culver.
Okay.
Garland to me has that. He's a 3-level scorer. I mean, he has the ability to create. He has the ability to get to the lane, and he has the ability to shoot off the dribble. I mean, to me, I know people didn't really get a chance to see him that much because I think he only played 5 games at Vanderbilt. But he's got the goods, man. I mean, he's going to be a really good fit with Sexton from this standpoint. And I know I have friends that are Bulls fans, and they're all saying the same thing. Like, how can these two coexist? And I think Sexton, who runs a million miles an hour, I think having a calm, relaxed scorer like Garland will actually really do him some good.
All right, well, that's good. That's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, Garland's got it all, man. I mean, other than if he can stay healthy, he arguably could be one of the best guards in this draft. And I'm not saying that because that's your home team. I really believe Darius Garland is really got a bright future.
All right, well, that's good to hear. We're hopeful that's going to be the case, because I think if you can, Sexton, and we're still not sure exactly what he is yet, but he certainly is a good player. It's just a matter of, again, can he find his role and find his niche and figure out exactly what he's going to be. But if Garland can be that scorer and can do some of the things that you're describing, that obviously turns into a very, very good pick if he ends up being one of the better players, one of the better guards coming out of the draft. Then we picked 2 other guys in the first round, Dylan Windler, and then Kevin Porter Jr. had a nice opening exhibition game for the Cavs the other night, scored 16 in his debut, and I know that a lot of people said he was a top 10 talent with, potential off-the-court issues. So talk a little bit about those 2 guys, Windler and Kevin Porter Jr., what you thought of them heading into the draft.
Yeah, Porter was all over the place. In one mock, I had him going as high as 10th. And then as the season progressed, he slowly went down the list. He's got everything you want. He kind of reminds you a little bit of like a young Caron Butler a little bit. Very, very strong going into the lane, finishes over bigger players, shifty with the ball. He's not a knockdown three-point shooter, but he's improved that tremendously. If there is a problem with him, definitely off the court, there's been some people worried about his mental state, that he doesn't always make good choices. So that's really what drove him down in the draft. As far as Windler, huge fan of Windler. I actually had him pegged to go in the first round. That was one I actually hung my head on because last 2 weeks of the draft, his stock just exploded. And I think that's a testament to him. And I think more importantly, that's a testament to the ability to shoot threes. Joe Harris from a few years ago is a prime example of, if you can get your shot off and you've got good size, the NBA will take you higher than they ever have. And you got to remember, Kyle Korver in 2004 went in the second round late. So I think what we're seeing now is the NBA says, look, if you're a knockdown three-point jump shooter, we want you. And Windler, who's 6'8", he's just, it's very hard to have him any daylight, he can shoot it. So, I think that was a great pick for them. Again, they don't need much. Where they drafted him, I think it was a very smart choice.
Yeah, I think all three of those guys have the potential to be good NBA players and to make a contribution even this year as rookies. And obviously the Cavs aren't going to be very good, so you'd think that with John Beilein coming in from college that they're going to want to play some of these young guys and develop them and hopefully give them an opportunity to show what they can do. And eventually when the Cavs are ready to move back, at least into playoff contention, those guys will be ready to be some key contributors. If you look at this draft class overall, who's a guy maybe who wasn't a top 10 pick that you think could end up being one of the 5 best players potentially coming out of this draft? Is there a guy that you could point to that was maybe a later first round pick that you think could end up from a performance standpoint sneaking up into, making the first team all rookie team?
Oh, without question. I would say Darius Bazley. I really like him. I was, again, one of the few that had him pegged for the first round. He's got everything that a modern power forward has. Handles the ball, good court vision, can shoot with some range. Don't be surprised if he shows himself to be in a maybe a second team all rookie team. Grant Williams, very tough kid from Tennessee that Boston selected. Strong, powerful, low center of gravity. He's just a beast down low. Could definitely work out in the long term. And then Keldon Johnson, who San Antonio took 29th, they always show themselves every year to be one of the smartest guys in the room, because they just sit there and they just literally wait for teams to make mistakes. And then when they do, Keldon Johnson, somebody that people had pegged as a top 15 pick when he declared, and he just fell, and San Antonio was there. And as you see with Lonnie Walker, they're going to probably put him down to the G League and then probably slowly work him back up. And when they do, people are going to say, how did he get down to 29th overall? That's what they do. It's amazing.
Yeah, Spurs have done over the course. You don't maintain the 19-year playoff streak or wherever they're at now without being able to develop players, and they obviously did a really good job of having Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker on their roster for a long time. But you even with those guys on the roster, you don't maintain that level of success without being able to develop some guys who weren't expected to develop into really good players. And as you said, that's kind of been the Spurs' MO. And they've got a couple guys on the roster now that fit that bill. Lonnie Walker being one of them, DeJounte Murray, Derek White. I mean, these guys are guys who weren't necessarily high draft picks, but who have ended up being key contributors to their team for sure.
Oh, yeah. They just amaze me. Every year, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, this is going to be the year where they'll be trash. And every year it's like they got this guy that they've been cultivating, and he's there. And, like every time you count them out. I mean, that's what makes Popovich and R.C. Buford at San Antonio. That's what makes them such a lethal coach and GM, is that those guys, they have a plan, and every year they go in that draft or they go through free agency, and they're almost like Belichick and Rob Kraft. Like, they know what they're doing.
Yep.
They have a recipe, and they don't deviate.
Yeah, there's something to be said for having a system. You look at teams that don't have the same level of continuity across, whatever sport you want to talk about, whether it's basketball, football, and the teams that have a system, the teams that have the same management in place for a long time, those teams are the ones that tend to get things right more often than not. And obviously it's an exact science, and you're not right 100% of the time, but you make yourself a lot more likely to be correct when you have a system, as opposed to every year just kind of going in with a crapshoot and trying to figure out, well, what are we doing this year? How are we going to do this? The Spurs, the Patriots are teams that they know what their formula is and they stick to it. And as you said, that leads to success more often than not. As you've listened to the Hoopheads podcast, one common topic that continually comes up in our conversations is character. I'm fortunate to be associated with the Positive Coaching Alliance, a national nonprofit movement that provides valuable tools, training, and resources for coaches, athletes, parents, and administrators that is centered around sports and educational psychology and organizational behavior research. PCA combines this research with practical advice from a national advisory board of top pro and college athletes and coaches who utilize PCA principles at the highest levels of competition. Through a partnership with our local Cleveland chapter of the PCA, we are pleased to offer a discount code to allow you, our listeners, to take a PCA online course for just $20. To take advantage of this offer, visit the store on positivecoach.org and enter the discount code HoopHeads20. That's HoopHeads20 with 2 capital H's. Coaches, I hope you'll take advantage of this great offer from the Positive Coaching Alliance and help us continue to grow the game. All right, let's jump back into history, and let's go back to the beginning of the podcast. You mentioned 2 interesting pieces of draft history that are sort of right in my wheelhouse. I was born in 1970, so the Patrick Ewing draft and the Michael Jordan draft are kind of right in that era when I was in middle school, high school, and was a huge NBA fan. And Michael Jordan was my guy too, so I'm right there with you on that. Let's talk about the Ewing lottery. What do you know about the potential conspiracy theories with how Ewing ended up in New York? Any truth in your mind to any of the frozen envelope, the bent corner, any of the other things that have been floating around out there? You got any insider information for us?
I have no insider information, and I know that it pisses the NBA off every time conspiracies fly. And as I tell people all the time, the NBA kind of does themselves a disservice, because even though they try to be more transparent, it's still, to many people, it's almost like rocket science. It's like, dude, like, I'm supposed to believe you went into a back room.
Let's bring those ping pong balls out to light, right?
Right. I mean, Orlando Magic, they get Shaq one year, and then 93 they get Chris Webber. I mean, and they had like less than a 10% chance of getting the number 1 pick. I'm supposed to believe this? Like, well,
then you got the Cavs. They get LeBron, and then LeBron leaves, and magically after one bad season, the Cavs have the number 1 and the number 4 pick. With, by the way, the number 1 pick that we had was from Sacramento and had a 3% chance of being a number 1 pick.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think Bill Simmons actually said that on an NBA draft. He said, Can we please stop giving Cleveland the number one pick because they lost LeBron?
For sure, he definitely said that. We remember that. We remember that well.
There's a lot of people in Cleveland that don't really like Bill Simmons. We do.
We do. We're fans, but yeah, I could see where some people may not didn't care for that comment from Bill. But so you cannot confirm the frozen envelope.
I've seen the video because it's on YouTube, of course, and I do understand where people see that it's frozen or they think that it's frozen. And listen, I mean, again, it wouldn't shock me. Like, nothing really shocks me. I mean, again, the NBA is a corporation and the NBA teams are franchises. And I always tell people this, like, when people start talking about, players that come out of college should be able to sign with any NBA team they want because that's like the real world. That's not the real world. You're talking about free capitalism, which there's 30 different lawyer groups, and you're a lawyer that graduates, and you get to choose what 30 out of that 30 where you want to go. The NBA is one corporation, and it has 30 franchises, and its responsibility is to make sure that the franchises that are successful stay successful and profitable, and that all around they have a good general experience for the NBA fans across all those 30 franchises. So, it's not the same thing as like 30 different teams with 30 different corporations. Like, there's one corporation. So it wouldn't shock me. But at the same time, the cynic in me is like, why would they do that? Yeah. They couldn't be this dumb.
I agree. I agree with you. Whenever you think about, you can make a coherent argument on both sides of that. You can certainly see why at that time Ewing was obviously the biggest star, and it's clear you could see why they wanted him to be in New York or why they would have wanted him to go to New York. And yet at the same time, it's so hard to believe that there would have been something nefarious going on, because if that truly came to light, if there was some legitimate evidence that they were rigging that lottery for the Knicks, I think the backlash towards the league would have been pretty strong, especially at that time. The NBA was still kind of in the growing stage, and man, if they would have been found out that they had bent the corner or froze the envelope or in some other way rigged it so that he did get to New York, it would have been a lot of bad publicity for David Stern and the NBA at that point.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the NBA was still having tape delay on the NBA Finals game. So, like, I don't, to me, to your point, the repercussions if they got caught would have been massive and might have been even a death bell for the league if they got caught. So that's why I don't totally believe in it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, part of me wants to believe it just because I think it would be a fun story if it was true. But
right.
I think there was too much at stake for them to risk trying to go about doing that to rig it. I just don't see where it might have happened. But figured I'd ask you, see if you had anything there on that. Let's go to the other thing you mentioned in the opening was Michael Jordan going third in that 1983 draft. So when you look back on that, what was the case for the Trailblazers picking Sam Bowie other than the fact that it was almost a positional need draft? Was there anything beyond that was there anybody in Portland at that time that you found that really thought that Bowie was going to end up being a better player than Jordan? Or was it more that, well, Bowie's not quite as good as Jordan, but he fits a positional need?
Yeah, it's the telltale of what I call BPA. And BPA is a mindset that I think every team that drafts in the top 10 should have, which is go with the best player available. And to me, Portland said, well, look, again, Michael Jordan, people may not believe us when we tell them this, but there was a long time ago where the theory was you got your big man and then you built out. And Michael Jordan changed all that because it was the first time you started from the perimeter and then you built your way in. So Portland sitting there, they have Clyde Drexler. They're fresh off 1978 when they had Bill Walton, who was league MVP, and they won a title with Bill Walton. And I think Sam Bowie, I mean, people, I know I've had tons of discussions about this. People don't realize Sam Bowie was a legitimate player. silky touch, athletic, ran the floor, blocked shots. I mean, he was the real deal. The problem was, and this is why Portland gets flack, is because Bowie sat out 2 straight years at Kentucky. Like, he didn't play for 2 straight years to get his legs right, and then he had his senior year, and then that's when Portland took him. So if there is any criticism that I have of Portland with that pick, it's definitely you took a guy that's been injured 2 years straight. Like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take that chance. And as I said, if you're in the top 10, I don't care if you have 3 shooting guards that are great. You take Michael Jordan. He's the best player available.
Yeah,
that's what I would.
I agree with you there. That's what we were hoping with the Darius Garland pick, is that he's going to be the best. He's the best player available, and yeah, maybe he's sort of duplicative of Colin Sexton, but if he's the best player available, that's the guy I want him to take. So that's my hope, is that the Cavs were sitting in their draft room and said, look, this guy may be very similar to a guy we already have on the roster, but he's clearly the best player that is available right now, so we're going to take him and figure it out later. And I think if you're a team, especially if you're a team like the Cavs, where you're rebuilding and you're not close to contention, one player is not going to make or break you at this point, then you pick the best player and you sort out the fit and all that other stuff later, and end up, maybe both those guys end up being really good, and maybe they can't play together, but now you have an asset that you can deal and trade to somebody, to somebody else. And so I hope that's the philosophy. And I think you're right. The best player available theory, if you go back in time, and it probably cuts across all drafts, I'm guessing, whether it's the NBA or NFL.
I mean, definitely the Cavs took Anthony Bennett. He was the best player available.
Yeah, well, he got released today, right?
Yeah, he got cut by the Houston Rockets.
The Rockets let him go today, so it's not. They didn't have to take a look at him for very long in order to let Anthony Bennett go. So that's a draft pick that, if you look back on sort of the history of what the Cavs were, I know they traded him to Minnesota to get Kevin Love, but if you had, and again, that draft was relatively weak, and I guess they could have had
Oladipo.
Oladipo is probably the guy that, if you look back on it, that had a legitimate chance of maybe being selected in that top position. It would have been nice to have him, but it's just interesting that Bennett just never, he had a huge body and just, he looked the part, but just never was able to produce out on the court.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Bennett's, and that's why I'm laughing, because I tell people all the time, I have 100% accountability. I make calls on guys, and if I'm wrong, I'm the first person to own it, because look, it's in print. So
right, yeah, you can't walk that back, right?
No, can't walk that back. And I actually think what happened with Anthony Bennett, his weight was always a little bit of a fluctuation when he was in college and high school. And I think with the UNLV brand, he and Kem Birch, who's now at Orlando Magic, they kind of brought back the nostalgia of UNLV. And I think myself included, I mean, look, I'm I'm human. I think we kind of had this vision of, well, he's like Larry Johnson, but without the athleticism and, these other parts. But he's got the silky touch. He shoots from the outside. He can rebound in position. Anthony Bennett, he was amazing at UNLV that year. And, when he got to the NBA, I don't know if he grew passive or if he found that the NBA was too hard, but he just stopped. It looked like to me he stopped caring about being a good ball player, which was really weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you watch him play, and then in college, and then there were even flashes. Like there was an occasional game or two that first year with the Cavs where you'd get a 5-minute stretch of Anthony Bennett. We were like, wow, this guy's going to figure it out. He has the tools. It's just a matter of, can he figure out how to use those tools? And I think that was a very, very good description of it. It seemed like he just stopped caring about being a good player, and he just was like, I can't figure this out, or I don't want to figure it out. and just kind of went into a shell, and obviously has never recovered, with the fact that I got to believe that this opportunity with the Rockets was his last gasp of staying in the NBA. And so who knows, maybe he'll go and play overseas or do something and continue his career. But I think his days of being invited to NBA training camps or have a shot at making a roster, I think those ended when the Rockets released him.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's definitely going to go down as one of the worst number one modern picks. He's not the worst number one pick of all time, but he's in that he's sitting at the table with a lot of those guys.
All right, so let's go through. Give me your top 3 worst number one draft picks in the history of the league.
Ooh, well, I think you got to go with LaRue Martin. Portland again drafted him, and he was out of Loyola Chicago, and he had one good game, and it was against Bill Walton at UCLA. He had one good game. That was it. Just one good game. And they said, oh, we're going to take LaRue Martin. So they selected him, and he was awful. He did not do very well. Then Portland later drafts Bill Walton in 1974. So that guy, I would have him number 3. Number 2, I would say these are early guys that most people probably won't even know, but I would say Mark Workman from West Virginia. He was drafted, I think that was 54. He went number 1. Terrible. Had one season in the league and just never really stuck on to anybody. And the reason why I don't have Anthony Bennett in the top 3, just as a disclaimer, because I know people are going to be like, why does he have Bennett? Because you literally were able to get something out of Bennett. You got Kevin Love. So
true.
That's the reason why I don't have him in the top 3. And then finally, Gene Melchior in 1953, he got caught in the scandals of the 1950s with the betting. He was selected number 1 overall, and then the league banned him, so he could never play. So, to me, if you can't ever play, that's a wasted pick.
So where does Greg Oden fall on your list? Because I seem to think Portland seems to be on top of a lot of people's lists. And here's the only reason I asked that question is because they passed on probably one of the top, by the end of his career, possibly top 10 players of all time in Kevin Durant.
Yeah, where'd you stand on the Oden Durant draft?
I was on Durant.
Okay.
I was on Durant. I actually have the scouting report from that time, and I said Durant is the best talent. I said Oden could possibly be David Robinson 2.0. I mean, because that 1 year at Ohio State, he was amazing.
Yeah, he was phenomenal that year. There's no doubt. I mean, he was dominant. He was so athletic and could block shots and score.
He just looked so old, though.
I
always felt like he was older than he actually was.
And now, it's funny because now I look at him, and when I think Greg Oden, I think a lot of Joel Embiid. I think they were very similar and now Embiid has stepped out on the floor a little bit more and probably has a little bit better footwork and maybe is a little bit more nimble than Oden was. More of a power player down in the post, but they remind me a lot of each other. And obviously Embiid is going to be, if he stays healthy, can be, one of the best players in the league. And Oden certainly was on that track, but just couldn't keep himself healthy. It's just interesting. You look back on that, and now people could say, well, obviously it was Durant. There's no question. How could anybody ever think about it? But to your point, Matthew, you talked about how good Oden looked that 1 year at Ohio State. He was incredible. It took him all the way to the championship game and almost brought him to an NCAA title.
I mean, people don't realize. Ohio State, he was on a team full of draft picks. There's Daquan Cook was there. Michael Conley was the point there. Michael Conley went 4th, and I believe Daquan went in the 20s. So you're talking about a loaded team there, and he was the number 1 guy. And it baffles the mind. Again, I never suspected Oden when we found out about Greg Oden. I was still with NBADraft.net, and we had got this story about this 9th grader who was going to be the next great big man. And, I'm not going to lie. Every time you get one of these prep phenom stories, you're always like, we'll see. and every year, his legend grew, and it was like, yeah, holy crap, this kid is the real deal. And it's sad because I could truly understand why Portland took him, but at the end of the day, I mean, Kevin Durant was just amazing at Texas. I mean, 25 points a game, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 blocks. I mean, there was nothing he couldn't do, and I don't think anybody's shocked at where he is in the game right now. I mean, he's arguably the best player in the game, and I don't know if Seattle would have been able to keep him, but not Seattle, I'm sorry, Portland. But, I mean, you can't argue with the results that KD has put in the league.
For sure. And I think, we talked about it earlier with passing and how that translates. And Durant's ability to shoot the ball at his size, I don't think there was any doubt coming out of Texas that he was going to be able to score just because he could score in so many different ways. And then the fact that he was such a good rebounder in college usually bodes well when guys are good rebounders in college. And again, they have the other skills that complement that, and that usually translates pretty well as well, that they can get to the boards in college and average 10 or 12 rebounds like Durant did. Usually you're going to end up being a pretty good rebounder in the pros. And so it's interesting to look back on those kind of dilemmas where those two players were, you could probably split hairs, and you probably took a poll of all the GMs in the league at that time, and it probably would have been 50-50. And then you look at the career arc for those two guys, and as Jason said a minute ago, Durant, depending on how the end of his career finishes up, could end up being a top 10 player in the history of the league. And Oden, is just a footnote in history. And it's incredible what injuries can do, for sure.
Oh, without question. I mean, injuries, especially big men, I mean, they've killed careers. I mean, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, his career was shortened because of foot injuries. Bill Walton, foot injury.
For sure, yeah.
Yao Ming. I mean, it takes a toll when these guys are so big and they move the way they do. There's tremendous stress on the legs and the feet. So when they go bad, it's very hard for those guys to recover.
Who's a guy that well, we've kind of talked here about big men. So let's go a non-big man. Who's a guy in your mind that was drafted high, had a super high upside, and just never reached their potential as an NBA player because of injury? I kind of have two guys that I'm thinking of, so I'm curious to see what names you come up with, and then I'll throw mine out there after you come up with one or two.
Let me think here. Well, he's not a big man, but I would say he's a power forward. But I would say Larry Johnson's definitely one of them. I mean, first 3 years in the league, he's an all-star, 20 points a game guy, destroys his back, and has to convert to small forward. And, I mean, he's a great player, but he's never the same again. He doesn't have the 45-inch vertical that he had at the power forward slot. I think Larry Johnson is one of the saddest cases because, I mean, we never got to see how great he could have been in the league. I mean, he was one of the first big men to really handle the ball, shoot the ball from the perimeter at his, strength and size, and it was a rarity. So I was a huge Larry Johnson fan growing up, and to me, he never really got a chance to showcase his skills at his prime.
I modeled my shot after Larry Johnson's shot.
There you go, Larry Johnson. I love Larry Johnson, and he not only was he a great player, but he had a personality too. And had he continued on his career arc, as you said, after his first 2 years, he would have been one of the biggest and brightest stars in the league. And as it was, he still was a well-known and well-liked player, but never quite got to the heights I think that he could have had he not gotten injured. I think you're 100% right on that. So my two guys I was thinking of, Penny Hardaway.
Oh yeah.
And Grant Hill. And both of them had good careers. And in the case of Grant Hill, he played probably, longer than most people might think looking back on his career, but he never was the same after his ankle injury. And then Penny, to me, is the one that you look at early Penny Hardaway highlights when he was playing with Shaq in his first year or two.
He was doing the Harden step back before Harden.
I mean, Penny was such a good passer. He was so athletic, the dunks, the court vision. I loved watching that guy play. And again, he had a personality. And
Mike loved his commercials.
I loved his commercials. So little Penny, I always have to do my little Penny impression. The Secret Service couldn't guard me. But I love Penny, and he's he's proven that, not only can he do it as a player, but what he has going down there at the University of Memphis now with the number 1 recruiting class he has coming in. It'll be interesting to see what he's able to do with that program. But to me, those are two guys that from the era when I was younger, high school, college, Grant Hill and Penny are two guys that I think if they could have stayed healthy, the type of careers they could have had, we're talking about guys that ended up being top 10 players in the history of the game. And I think both of those guys could have been right there knocking on the door based on just their all-around skill sets. I just think, man, what they could have been had they not gotten hurt.
Absolutely. What about Jay Williams? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the thing with Jay Williams compared to these other guys we talked about is each of those other guys had at least a year, 2, 3 years where they were at their best, whereas we never really got to see Jay Williams. But you look at Jay Williams at Duke, and you look at just his physicality and the way he was built and the way the game was played when he was coming in, and I just think he probably would have excelled. And it's hard to know exactly where he would have finished because we just never got to see him healthy in the league. He had that injury occurred so early in his career that it's hard to really project out what he might have been compared to, again, Penny or Grant Hill or Larry Johnson. But yeah, I think Jay Williams is certainly a guy that you wish you could have been able to see him develop.
I got one for you.
All right.
Brandon Roy.
Yeah, Brandon Roy. Again, Brandon Roy's a guy who has kind of like Penny and Grant Hill. He has a track record of 5 or 6 years of being just fantastic, and then no more cartilage in his knee and just had to shut it down. Shame.
I think Derrick Rose too, though.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, Derrick Rose.
Hey, he dropped 18 tonight. Bringing it back.
I tell you what, there was nothing better than seeing his comeback. But again, what's crazy is his comeback. He's still not even close to what he was in his prime. It's amazing.
No, you look at those highlights from his MVP year, and just the things that he could do from an athletic standpoint, the jumping, but then just the level of violence in his jump stops and cuts and change of direction and crossover. He was just, that year, he was amazing. And you figure, okay, he's 22 years old and he wins the MVP. He's got his whole entire career ahead of him after having won that MVP at such a young age. And now, I remember reading at some point that, he may end up being the only MVP that doesn't make the Hall of Fame. Now, the Basketball Hall of Fame's credentials are a little lower maybe than some people might like. So who knows? Maybe there's a chance that he will, get in if he can stick around for a few more years and put up some kind of counting numbers. But yeah, he's definitely a guy that, what he could do when he was at his peak, and the player that he is now, it's like night and day.
Oh, for sure. It's amazing. I mean, to the NBA, the Hall of Fame, I mean, the Hall of Fame, the NBA has to fix some of that.
Yeah, it's almost like, I get that it's the Basketball Hall of Fame, so you have contributors, and you have international players, and you have coaches, and you have all this. But honestly, the NBA needs to put together at least, if not completely their own Hall of Fame, there certainly needs to be a wing of the Basketball Hall of Fame that's strictly for NBA players, and then they got to tighten up the standards for who gets in and who doesn't. I think it'd make it more meaningful, but who knows? Maybe only NBA nerds like you and Jason and I really care about any of that stuff anyway, so who knows?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got ripped all to shreds when I thought it was ridiculous that Vlade Divac went in, but,
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can look at it as, okay, what's these guys' contribution to the overall game and the history of it, and I guess you can make an argument in that case. But if you're strictly going by what we all define as being a Hall of Fame player. Certainly Vlade Divac doesn't qualify as a Hall of Fame NBA player based on.
What about as a GM? Is he an NBA Hall of Fame or GM?
Early in his career, I think the GM, his GM record was let's be kind here and call it spotty. But now, okay, you can he's done fairly well. It seems like Sacramento at least is pointed in the right direction and seems to have some guys that could potentially end up being very, very good. I think there's no doubt that De'Aaron Fox is going to be one of the best guards in the league in the next couple of years. And although Bagley, they got panned for taking Bagley instead of taking Doncic, it seems like Bagley, they're pretty high on him there in Sacramento, and I know they feel like he's going to be really, really good. Now, does he get to the level that Doncic potentially could get to? I'm not sure because I don't know that Bagley's ever going to be a three-point shooter or what kind of defender he's going to be, but the guy's going to score and rebound, I think.
If Ben Simmons is a three-point shooter now, I bet you Bagley could become one.
I guess that's true. Yeah, once Simmons knocks down one, it's all over, man.
That's it, man. He got it, too. That's amazing.
I know. So, the celebration for that shot was incredible.
So, I have a question for you. So, we talked about the three worst number one picks of all time. Can you tell us, in your opinion, the three, and I think I know where one of them is going to go, but the three best number one picks of all time?
Ooh, three best. Well, that's a great question. I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, Irvin, Magic Johnson, definitely, probably might even be the best number one pick of all time. Let me think. Who else here? Oscar Robertson. I know he was a territorial pick, but Cincinnati Royals were going to draft number one anyways. So that's why I count him as a number one pick. That third one, I mean, this is the funny thing about the NBA draft, and that's why I said it's the perfect inexact science, because so much of the best picks are in the later rounds. And a lot of number one picks actually are just all right players, like most of them. You got Michael Thompson, who's Klay Thompson's dad. He was the number one pick. But and I'd probably say LeBron James would be third.
I was worried. I was getting concerned.
Coach Jason was giving me faces here over here. He was staring me down. He's like, I hope he's going to say LeBron.
And Shaq as well.
Yeah.
And Kareem, I think you could make a pretty good argument.
Yeah.
You could make a pretty good argument for Kareem.
Any of those five, I could make an argument for.
Yeah, there's
I guess we can also put Tim Duncan there too.
Yeah, Tim Duncan, the longevity of his career and what he was able to do. It's again, you start splitting hairs when you get into that, that level of detail of who's where. We did a little exercise, Matthew. Probably should have had you on for this. We did an episode where we talked about our top 10 players of all time. We did the top three teams. So we did a first team All-NBA, second team All-NBA, and third team All-NBA all time. And so that was tough. Like you start getting into, some of the positions. And we talked a lot about the center position and how I think we had, you had to get down to three.
I got one question.
Okay.
I had to cut you off. I got one question.
Go for it.
Did Wilt Chamberlain make the list?
So Wilt was my first team. Wilt was my first team guy. I have Wilt. I have Wilt second. Jordan's my number one player of all time. I have Wilt second on my list.
I feel like we had him. The other guy that we did it with, he was on our list. He was on all our lists.
Everybody had him in the top. Everybody had him on one of those three teams.
Yeah, I think everyone had him either on the first or the second team.
I think we all had him on the first team.
Maybe.
I'd
have to pull it up.
The statistics are just the statistical case for Wilt is just overwhelming, and obviously there's the Bill Russell wins more championships argument that people put forth, but it's just hard to argue with the type of athlete that Wilt was, and the numbers that he put up are just staggering. So I don't know how you feel about it. I'm assuming since you asked that question that you're in the Wilt camp.
Yeah, I have Wilt as the greatest player of all time.
That's fair. That's fair.
That puts me at odds with a lot of people because, obviously, and look, I've come to the realization that it's probably impossible to really have the number one pick and be right about it. So I've come up with this idea that there's a table. And to me, Michael Jordan's at that table. LeBron James is at that table. Kareem's at that table. and Wilt Chamberlain's at that table. So if you pick any of those guys, or Magic too, if you pick any of those guys, I'm okay with you saying they're the best.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid 5 to be able to pick from. I'd still make the argument that Jordan is the best, but again, I watched so much less of Wilt Chamberlain. My awe of Wilt Chamberlain is just when I go and I look at the records and I read the stories and you hear about, I think more than anything, what his contemporaries, the way they talked about him in terms of just what a physical marvel he was and just how good he was as a basketball player, that there's no way that guys who played against him talk with as much reverence about Wilt as probably any player has ever been talked about by the people that played with and against him in league history. And that's a ringing endorsement when the people that you're playing with and against talk about your greatness. That really means something. And I think the numbers are just staggering. But for Jordan, I guess I have more personal experience with watching him play. So
sure.
We all tend to gravitate towards the things that we've seen more often.
I think that came into play too, because I think all three of us had Tim Duncan either on the first or the second team for this. And I mean, when you think about the greatest players of all time, I don't think that he's probably in the top 10. Maybe you could argue for him being in the top 10, but we had him on the first or second team just because of the obviously positionally we had him in the top on the first or second team. But he was also kind of like, whenever you hear a story about Tim Duncan, he was always such a great leader and a great teammate. And I think, we could talk about that too. It's just kind of crazy how he probably isn't a top 10 player all time, but he was definitely on our teams.
Right. Where'd you guys put, anybody have Stephen Curry in their list?
My buddy Dan had him on there, but I don't think none of us had him. I didn't have him on mine.
No, I did not have him. He was one of my close snubs, but I think by the end of his career, he'll probably nudge his way in there. I know, like, we had at the guard position,
Magic Johnson.
Right. We had Magic. We had Oscar Robertson. We had these are just the guys that all of us that were in the discussion. Jerry
West.
Obviously Jordan.
Stockton was.
We talked about Stockton. But, Magic.
Kobe.
Kobe was.
I was the only one. I think.
What?
I think I was the only one that had Kobe on a team.
I think you were the only
because I had him on the second team. I didn't even have him on a third team. I had him on a second team.
But didn't you have him playing out of position?
I had kind of. I had him playing out of position because I
think Jason had him. He had him at small forward. I think he had Larry Bird at the guard spot. So we had to kind of steer him back in the right direction. But I think Steph's going to probably get there. You combine the championships, the two MVPs, and just how revolutionary of a player he was. Durant was the one guy that is still playing now, besides LeBron, that we thought
we were all unanimous
that Durant was gonna, that Durant should be there. And then other guys we kind of had discussions around. The center spot was the hardest. Because you figure you have Wilt, you have Kareem, you have Bill Russell, you have
Shaq.
You have Shaq. Because
I was the only one that had Shaq too.
You have those five guys. And you can make an argument now that we're never going to see a center again. At least not in that, unless they change the rules. You're probably never going to see a center again sniff being a contender to be one of the top 15 players in the history of the league, because that position is just, it's almost obsolete. The guys that we're talking about play a totally different style of basketball than what we're playing today.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're going to probably change the rules. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah, because otherwise those centers are, they're dinosaurs. They're not coming back if the game continues to trend the way it is, or they're just going to look different. They're just going to play differently than the centers of the past, for sure. All right, I think I know my answer to this, and I am nowhere near as knowledgeable as you. What is the best draft of all time, top to bottom?
Man, well, I would say I'm kind of torn. I really am. I know the politically correct answer is 1984.
That's what I would go with.
But LeBron's
I was going to say 2003, baby. 2003.
That's a hard class, man. That's a tough class.
That's a pretty good top 5.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and even the 1970 draft too that doesn't get a lot of play. I mean, you talking about Pistol Pete, you got Bob Lanier, Dave Bing. I mean, there's so many guys that just really were good.
I think the only thing that really hurts the 2003 draft is Darko. Really, I mean, he kind of
Larry Brown killed him though.
Yeah,
he did. It would be interesting to see if he had been. We talked about it earlier. Situationally, where you go has such a big impact, and who that coach is in what your development can and can't be. Now, that's not to say that Darko is going to be a 10-time NBA All-Star, but I think if he had gone to a better situation,
I mean, even he went to the Magic after there, right? And he was actually like somewhat serviceable.
Yeah, I mean, he ended up being serviceable a couple of years.
Minnesota and then Orlando or something like that.
Yeah. But again, you wonder if he had been in a different place right from the get-go, maybe his career takes a different turn. And like I said, I don't think he was a 10-time NBA All-Star who should have been drafted number 2. But if he had gone somewhere else, he could have probably had a long career and developed in a different way and maybe at least come close to living up to his potential. Probably never was going to be meant to live up to that number 2, draft position, but still, yeah, he definitely.
I was one of the few that I actually scouted him, and then I interviewed him, and he was every bit as good as people thought. I would have, and I remember international people telling me, do you think the Pistons are really going to take him? I mean, why wouldn't they take Carmelo Anthony? So that was the international community. But at the same time, Darko had this, he was really, when I interviewed him, he had a translator at this time. He couldn't speak English very well. And there's a time difference between us and Serbia. So I'm calling him up, and I was like 5 minutes late, and I can't remember what happened. I had called his guy. I said, "Look, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late. I'll call right back." And the guy was like, "Okay." And then, so I call, and his translator is like, I hear Darko speaking Serbian, and it's passionate. Like, I know he's cussing me out. I know he's saying some really nasty shit to me. And I'm like, oh gosh, he's cursing me out. And then his translator goes, "So Darko says he's happy to meet you."
That's hilarious.
Hey, just so you know, Darko played in the game yesterday. He took a 7-year hiatus. He showed up to a game in northern Serbia to play a game. He scored 2 points and then got injured in the first 5 minutes of the game. Hurt his shoulders.
You see the size of him, though?
Oh, he's ginormous now.
Yeah, he's
yeah.
But
last time I saw, he was a cherry farmer.
Right? Yeah. I remember that because there was a story in ESPN the magazine like a year or two ago, right? That talked about what he was doing now. And I forget he owned some big acreage back in Serbia. And you're right, he may have been a cherry farmer.
He's apple orchard. He's got 125 acre apple orchard he owns.
There you go.
That's what he did with all that money he got.
So let's just call him a fruit farmer. We don't have to narrow it down too much.
Yeah, but Larry Brown, I do think, killed his confidence, and then you had Rasheed Wallace and Ben Wallace. I mean, they're not going to give him any breaks.
No, absolutely not. All right, give us one or two weird NBA draft stories. If you go back in the history of the draft, give us one or two unusual things that you found in your research related to the draft. It could be anything based on your definition of weird.
Well, all right, I got one for you. So, 1961, John Burbidge plays for UCLA. He gets drafted by the St. Louis Hawks in the 5th round. And he gets cut. And you figure that's the end of his career. Well, he later goes back to school, graduates with a psychology degree, and he actually helped create the profile that captured Ted Bundy. And he was responsible for catching the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. So, lot of people
Wow.
don't know that.
I did not know that. That's a bit of NBA trivia that I did not know for sure. Interesting.
Yeah, totally.
That's very interesting. All right. Go ahead. Did you have one more?
No, go ahead.
All right. So next thing I wanted to ask you about is if you look back through the totality of the NBA draft, obviously as we've gone forward from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and into where we are now, the scouting has gotten better. The amount of information that is available to teams has gotten better. Where do you see the scouting process? How do you see it continuing to evolve when it comes to analytics and the biomechanic analysis that they're doing on players now that can theoretically predict injuries because their body isn't balanced, or the way they land, or the way they run, or the way their ankle pronates when they're doing something. Talk a little bit about where you see the scouting for the NBA draft, how it's going to continue to develop over the years to come.
Yeah, the NBA draft, the scouting concepts that were employed in the 1950s, I mean, these guys from today, it's light years away. I mean, these guys were literally picking up magazines off the rack. If they had a friend at a college or they knew somebody at the college, they would call the college, maybe would go see them play, and they would then draft them. Then you had Jerry Krause and Marty Blake, who kind of took it to another level. And Jerry Krause started to chart where guys were making shots on the floor, where they were really good at making shots. And then Marty Blake then started a scouting group for the NBA that basically he employed several different scouts throughout the United States at the time, because international basketball was really not a tangible solution at that time, and helped orchestrate and develop scouting material for NBA teams. And then in the 1980s, we see that the international basketball community is, after the NBA has steadily invested into it, the international basketball community is starting to produce. So we have, Arvydas Sabonis, Drazen Petrovic, Vlade Divac, Tony Kukoc, Dino Raja. So we're starting to get these international gems. So now we open up the next door, which is now we're scouting overseas. And now we're not just scouting in America, we're scouting overseas. And now we're saying, okay, let's look at the numbers beyond the numbers. So now we're looking at win shares and PER and true shooting and usage rates, and just the possibilities are endless. And then now we're looking at long-term health. Is a guy, to your point, is a guy, because of how he plays, or even how he lands on his feet after he does a layup, is that going to cause knee injuries or ankle injuries in the future? And it always amazes me, because when you think it's like as a kid, when you play double dribble, you're like, on Nintendo, you're like, oh, it's never going to get better than this. And then it's like,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
It gets better and it gets better and it gets better. And the NBA, I think what people don't understand about the NBA draft, and I know you guys do, but what most people don't understand about the NBA draft is these players are investments, and the NBA is investing millions of dollars into these players. And because of that, they're going to be hyper focused on every detail, because they want to maximize their assets, and they want to make sure that when they go to that podium and they select that player, that they've done all their homework. And what I see happening in the future will be that NBA scouting will be changed, in that you're going to see more personal data being shared with players. I mean, with GMs, like, this guy, he's talking about politics like crazy on his Facebook account, like he could be somebody that we might have an issue with, in the public relations realm. Or, this guy, I saw his Instagram story, and, he's got blunts and jewelry, and he's making real crazy choices. Like now social media is now going to be weighed and measured with players, so you can account behavior, and are they reckless? Are they, like what are they doing? So like more and more we keep pushing the forefront to try to get a better grasp on players' behaviors and possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's something that is definitely going to become more and more and more important. And I think NBA teams have really done a great job of starting to understand how important the guy's fit is into the organization and what kind of teammate he's going to be. And just like anything else, it's an inexact science trying to figure out whether the guy is going to be a good teammate or not, and whether what kind of work ethic he's going to have, and how he's going to fit into your team culture and all that stuff. But slowly over time, I'm sure they're going to get better at that as they get better at collecting data and just asking more questions and looking at profiles of guys who, fit a certain mold in the past, and then, well, did that guy pan out or did he not pan out? And it's always interesting to see where this stuff goes. And I think the best part of it is, and it's probably the most interesting, I'm sure, for you, and it's definitely interesting for Jason and I, is the fact that no matter how much data we end up getting, it still is always going to be an inexact science. And you're always going to have your occasional Anthony Bennett or LaRue Martin pick number 1, or Darko going number 2, and then you're going to have Michael Jordan going number 3. It's just the reality of the situation when you're dealing with human beings who are fallible and who make mistakes and who aren't perfect. And as a result of that, you get this crazy thing that we call the NBA draft. I want to wrap up with 2 questions. So the first question is a serious question. I don't want to go too in depth because maybe we'll have you back on as we near next year's draft. But give us your top 3 right now, your top 3 prospects for the 2020 NBA draft, without going into detail about each guy. Just give us 3 names.
Sure. Anthony Edwards, Georgia; James Wiseman, Memphis State; and I would say Theo Maledon. He's in French.
All right, perfect. So we got 3 names that now we're going to watch for and keep an eye on. And now here's the time for the most serious question of the night. Give us your top 3 worst draft outfits in history.
Well, let me think.
I have 2. I have 2 clearly in my head. I think the number 1, I don't think there's any doubt about, but I'll be curious to hear what you think.
Well, I didn't like Jaylen Brown's draft outfit. It was a little special. But I understand they're trying to make a statement. Jalen Rose's outfit, the all red, was
that's definitely in my top 3. Jalen's definitely in the top 3.
Samaki Walker's outfit with the big hat always sticks with me.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a real good one. That was a very good one.
And I'm trying to think.
You didn't hit my favorite one of all time.
Which one is that? Jalen?
No, Karl Malone.
Ah, yeah.
The tiny, the tiny little the pencil tie, and just the tight pants, and that was not a good look for Karl Malone. Anybody who's out there, I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen any of those outfits, just do a quick Google search on any of those, and you'll be entertained for a few minutes at least.
Oh, for sure.
All right, Matthew, we're coming up on an hour and a half. We can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule to join us and talk NBA draft. It was a lot of fun to go through some of the history of the good picks, the bad, the ugly, everything that went on. And it's obvious that you put a lot of time and passion into what you do. And we would highly recommend anybody out there that wants to know more about the NBA draft that they get on and follow you and check out thedraftreview.com. But if you wouldn't mind right now, share how people can get in touch with you, how they can find out about all the great things you're doing. And if there's anything that we didn't touch on, draft related, that you want to share that we didn't ask about or that you didn't get a chance to talk about, do that after you share your contact information, and then we'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Sure. You can get in contact with me on Twitter at the Draft Review. That's the username. I'm on Instagram, same username, the Draft Review, and Facebook, Matthew J. Maurer. And of course, you can always email me through my website.
All right. We appreciate you, like I said, jumping on. It's been a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. And to everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Head Start Basketball's Player Development Academy offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate your game to the next level. Do you want to improve your ball handling, become a better shooter, or develop into a more skilled, confident player? Our Academy classes offer training that's designed to do just that. Our training sessions are innovative and will have you learning skills that are transferable to actual games. We have 4 different class skill levels for boys and girls, ages 4 and up. All Player Development Academy classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center. For more information or to get registered, please visit www.headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.